The dim glow of the streetlights barely reached the edges of her apartment. Outside, the city murmured. Cars passing, distant voices, the occasional honk. Inside, the silence between them was deafening. Nick stood near the window, hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, watching the rain blur the lights beyond the glass. The air smelled of her perfume, delicate and familiar, but it no longer felt like home. Emily was standing across from him, arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. She was beautiful as always, flawless makeup, soft waves framing her face, the kind of woman who could make someone wait a lifetime for her, and that was exactly what she had done to him. "Nick?" she said softly, shifting on her feet. He turned his head slightly, enough to let her know he was listening, but not enough to meet her eyes. "You know I care about you," she continued, the words delicate but calculated. I need time to figure things out." A pause. The rain against the glass filled the silence. Nick exhaled slow and steady before finally looking at her. There was a time when those words would have wrecked him, when he would have pleaded, convinced himself that waiting was the right choice, that she just needed more time to see him. But that time had passed. His voice was quiet but firm. "Take all the time you need." Emily's lips parted slightly, caught off guard by his lack of resistance. She expected a fight, a conversation, an argument to prolong the inevitable. Instead, he gave her nothing. Nick turned toward the door, reaching for the handle. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "I don't want you to think—" But he didn't wait. He didn't need to hear the rest. He pulled open the door, stepping into the cool hallway. As it clicked shut behind him, something settled inside his chest. Not sadness, not regret, but something closer to relief. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting for anyone, and for the first time, he was free. Nick vanished from Emily's world as if he had never been there at all. No lingering texts, no late-night calls, no subtle signs of his presence in her social media feeds. He was simply gone. At first, she barely noticed. She told herself she had expected this, that he was just licking his wounds, waiting for her to reach out first. Nick had always been patient, always the one to bridge the silence between them. He would return, like he always did, but the days stretched into weeks, then into months, and nothing. Emily found herself checking her phone more often than she cared to admit, scrolling through old conversations, rereading messages where he had been warm, steady, hers. She resisted the urge to type out something simple, "Hey, how have you been?" But each time, her pride stopped her. One night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Freshly showered, a towel wrapped around her body, her reflection blurred by the steam. Her mind drifted to him. Did he still think about her? Was he waiting just as she once had? But the worst part, the part she refused to acknowledge, was the quiet emptiness where he used to be. The certainty that no matter how long she waited, this time, he wouldn't come back. She started noticing small details in her life that had once been his. The playlist he had made her, it used to be background noise, something she barely paid attention to. Now every song carried a weight, a memory. She found herself skipping them, then later letting them play just to see if they still made her feel something. They did. At her favorite cafe, where they had once spent hours talking, she realized she had been sitting alone for nearly 20 minutes, stirring the foam of her latte, waiting for nothing. Even in the company of others, there was a space beside her where he should have been. The first true crack in her composure came late one evening when she reached for her phone and, without thinking, searched his name on social media. His profile was still there, unchanged, but different. The absence of her was palpable. There were new pictures. Nick leaning casually against the hood of his car, laughing with friends. A shot of him at some dimly lit bar, a drink in hand, his expression one she had almost forgotten. Relaxed, unguarded. And then, the image that shattered something inside her. A candid shot of him sitting at a table across from a woman she didn't recognize. Emily stared at the photo, searching for something. Hesitation in his posture, distance in his gaze, anything that would suggest he was still hers, that he was only pretending. But she saw none of that. The way he was leaning in slightly, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, he wasn't waiting for her anymore. He had moved on. Her stomach twisted. She set the phone down with trembling hands. For the first time, it hit her with full force. She had lost him. And not because he was angry or hurt or trying to make her jealous. She had lost him because, in the end, he had chosen himself. It was raining the night Emily showed up at Nick's apartment. Not the light romantic drizzle of movie scenes, but a relentless, unforgiving downpour. The kind that soaks through clothes in seconds, that drowns the sound of footsteps, that makes the world feel smaller, as if nothing exists beyond the haze of water and streetlights. She hadn't planned to come here. In fact, she had told herself repeatedly that she wouldn't, that she still had her pride, that there was no reason to see him again. But something had changed in her over the past weeks. Something raw and restless that wouldn't let her be. She had tried everything to suppress it. She had thrown herself into work, filled her evenings with empty social plans, even flirted with the idea of dating someone new. But none of it mattered, because in every quiet moment, in every space where her mind was left unchecked, there was only one thought circling back to her. And now, here she was, standing outside his door, drenched, hands curled into fists at her sides, pulse hammering in her throat. He could turn back. She should turn back. But before she could listen to reason, her fingers had already pressed the buzzer. A long silence stretched on the other side. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe he had seen her through the peephole and decided she wasn't worth answering for. Then the soft click of the lock. The door swung open, and there he was. Nick stood in the doorway, wearing a plain white t-shirt and dark sweatpants, his hair slightly tousled as if he had been getting ready for bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years they had shared, the weight of their history, all pressed into the humid space between them. Emily parted her lips to say something, but the words tangled in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but nothing she had prepared seemed right. Nick, however, spoke first. "What are you doing here?" His voice was steady, calm, but not warm. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. And somehow, that hurt more. Emily forced a breath, searching his face for something, anything that would tell her he had missed her, that he still cared. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nick let out a quiet sigh, running a hand over his face. The rain dripped from her hair onto the hardwood floor, pooling at her feet. But she didn't move. He stepped aside slightly. "You're getting water everywhere." It wasn't an invitation inside. It wasn't the kind of welcome she had been hoping for. But it was something. Emily stepped over the threshold, her wet shoes squeaking against the floor. The apartment smelled different than she remembered. The faint scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mingling with something warm and unfamiliar. And then she saw it. The sweater draped over the arm of the couch. Not hers, a woman's. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to keep her expression neutral. She turned to face him, her arms wrapping around herself in a feeble attempt to stop shivering. I needed to see you." Nick studied her, his eyes unreadable. What? The question knocked the air from her lungs. She wasn't sure she had an answer. Because she missed him? Because she had made a mistake? Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one being waited for? She was the one left behind? She swallowed hard. A sound from the other room, soft footsteps. Emily barely had time to process what was happening before another presence filled the doorway. A woman, barefoot, hair in a messy bun, wearing one of Nick's shirts. She stopped when she saw Emily, blinking in mild surprise. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Nick's gaze flickered between them. Then, with a steady breath, he spoke the words Emily had been dreading. "Emily, this is Lena." The name was like a slap to the face. Lena. The woman from the picture? The one who had been sitting across from Nick, smiling at him in a way Emily used to? Emily felt her lips part slightly, but no sound came out. Lena gave a small, polite nod before glancing toward Nick. "Do you need a minute?" "No." His response was immediate, firm. Emily's chest tightened. Lena disappeared down the hall, leaving the two of them alone again, but the moment had already shifted, changed into something Emily could no longer control. She wet her lips, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "So, that's her." Nick didn't confirm what was already obvious. He simply looked at her with the same unreadable calm he had carried since the moment he opened the door. Emily felt her heart pounding, her pulse loud in her ears. "I miss you," she confessed, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Nick's jaw tightened slightly. And then, softly, almost too softly, he said the one thing she hadn't been prepared for. I don't." Emily inhaled sharply. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Nick took a step back, one hand resting on the edge of the door. "I'm sorry you came all this way, but there's nothing left for you here." Emily searched his face, desperate for a crack in his armor, but there was none. Truly, fully, in a way she had never imagined possible. And as he stepped back and shut the door, leaving her standing there in the dim hallway, Emily realized that she had lost not just Nick, she had lost the version of herself that had always believed he would wait. The door closed with a quiet finality. Emily stood motionless in the dimly lit hallway, the weight of Nick's words pressing down on her like an avalanche. Two simple words, so sharp, so absolute. They had sliced through her like a blade, leaving nothing but a hollow ache in their wake. For a long moment, she didn't move. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper, a soft tapping against the window at the end of the corridor. The world hadn't stopped. The city kept moving. People laughed in bars, cars rumbled down wet streets, lives continued uninterrupted. Only she was frozen. Her mind struggled to catch up with reality. She had expected resistance, maybe even anger. She had been prepared for a heated conversation, for Nick to tell her how much he had hurt him, for him to finally spill all the words he had swallowed over the years. But she hadn't expected indifference. Nick hadn't just moved on. He had erased her. The air in the hallway felt thick, suffocating. She forced herself to take a breath, then another. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her coat pocket, wrapping around her phone like an anchor. She considered texting him, something, anything, to undo what had just happened, but there was nothing left to say. She turned on unsteady legs and walked away, her footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. The cab ride home felt surreal, like she was floating outside her own body. She barely noticed the driver glancing at her through the rearview mirror, his expression flickering with quiet concern. She must have looked like a wreck. Soaked from the rain, eyes distant, lips pressed together to keep from trembling. "You all right, miss?" he finally asked. Emily blinked, realizing she had been staring blankly at the city lights blurring past the window. "Yeah," she murmured, "just a long night." The driver didn't push for more. He simply nodded and focused on the road. Emily turned back to the window, watching neon reflections dance across the pavement. She thought of Nick, of the way he had looked at her, calm, unaffected. It was that, more than anything, that made her stomach twist. She had always believed he would wait. Even when she kept him at arm's length, even when she told him she needed time, even when she let him walk away without stopping him, she had thought that the door between them would always be slightly open, but she had miscalculated. She had mistaken patience for permanence, and now she had no one to blame but herself. Her apartment felt cold when she stepped inside. She tossed her coat onto the couch and leaned against the door for a moment, pressing her hands to her face. The silence was unbearable. Nick's presence had lingered here for so long, even in his absence. It was in the books he had once recommended that still lined her shelves, in the record player he had surprised her with on her birthday, in the coffee mug he used to reach for when he stayed over. But now those things felt like relics from another life, a life she had taken for granted. She sank onto the couch, staring at nothing, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. Her mind replayed the night in fragments. The rain, Nick's voice, the quiet way Lena had appeared in the doorway, completely at ease in the space that had once been Emily's. Her fingers tightened into fists. She had waited too long, and now she was the one left standing in the rain. The realization settled deep, curling inside her ribs like a dull ache. Nick had let her go, truly, completely, and she had no idea what to do with that. Days passed in a blur. She went to work, made polite conversation, forced smiles where they were expected, but something inside her was unraveling. She found herself unlocking her phone at odd hours, scrolling through their old messages as if they could somehow bring him back. She hovered over his name in her contacts list, debating whether to call. But she didn't. One afternoon, she made the mistake of walking by the cafe they used to frequent. Her legs moved on instinct before her brain could stop her, leading her to the corner table where they had spent countless mornings. Nick with his usual black coffee, her with her caramel latte, except now someone else was sitting there, a couple, laughing. She turned abruptly and walked away, swallowing against the sudden tightness in her throat. The world had continued without them, without her. That night, she sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, phone in hand. Her thumb hovered over Nick's profile. His most recent photo was still there, the one with Lena. They weren't touching, but there was an ease between them, a quiet understanding. Emily swallowed hard. She could still reach out. She could still try to fix this, to tell him she had changed, that she understood now, that she chose him. But as she stared at the screen, another truth settled over her. It wouldn't matter. Nick had already made his choice. And for the first time in her life, Emily understood what it felt like to be the one left behind. The phone slipped from her fingers onto the bed. She exhaled, slow and shaky, pressing her palms against her face. Maybe she had thought losing Nick would feel like a dramatic heartbreak, screaming, sobbing, some grand cinematic moment. But it didn't. It just felt quiet, like a door clicking shut, like the echo of footsteps fading into the night, like the weight of absence settling into the spaces where love had once lived. And for the first time, Emily understood. She hadn't lost Nick the night she showed up at his door. She had lost him long before that. She just hadn't noticed until it was too late. A week passed. Then two. Emily didn't call Nick. She didn't send a message. Not because she didn't want him, because she knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, she let the weight of silence settle around her, pressing in from all sides. At first, it was suffocating. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced she had to do something, that she still had a chance to fix this, to pull him back before he disappeared completely. But then she would remember he had already gone. And so slowly, she stopped waiting for something that wasn't coming. One evening, Emily found herself in the back of a bookstore, absently trailing her fingers along the spines of old novels. She had come here by habit. This was the place she and Nick had once spent hours together, browsing, talking about stories that neither of them ever actually bought. She picked up a book, flipping through the pages without really reading. Her mind drifted back to him, to the way he used to stand beside her, absent-mindedly leaning into her space, tracing the edges of the covers with quiet reverence. She used to love those moments. She used to love him. The realization was sudden and brutal. Not just that she had lost him, but that she had never fully appreciated him while she had him. Her fingers tightened around the book before she set it back on the shelf. She walked out of the bookstore without looking back. 3 months later, she saw him again. It wasn't planned. She had been walking along the waterfront, the air crisp with the first hints of winter, when she spotted him at a distance. Nick, he was leaning against a railing, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, talking with Lena. There was something so effortless about him, something she had never noticed before. He wasn't just moving on. He wasn't just surviving without her. He was happy. Emily hesitated, half hidden behind a lamppost, watching them for a moment too long. Then, as if sensing her, Nick turned. Their eyes met. For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition? But not longing, not regret. Just quiet understanding. Emily forced a small smile, lifting her fingers in a hesitant wave. Nick nodded once, his lips curving in something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite sadness. Then he turned back to Lena, his attention shifting away from Emily as easily as if she were just another passing stranger. Emily exhaled, the cold air stinging her lungs. She turned and walked away. But this time, she didn't look back. This time, she finally understood. The best thing she could do for both of them was to let go. Not just of him, but of the version of herself who had always thought he would be waiting. And as she disappeared into the city, something inside her shifted. Not closure, not relief, but acceptance. The kind that didn't come with a grand realization or a dramatic moment. Just a quiet, simple truth. Some people don't wait forever, and sometimes walking away is the most powerful choice of all.